Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
Yeah, but I'm not going to shave my beard, so it's not much of a wager.
We're live, man. So, welcome to the show. We've been talking about a friendly little wager. We'll have to defer it till another time since our beards are growing rather lengthy.
Yeah. I have these. This is antenna. I'm getting, all kinds of messages through my antenna.
I would say that mine is darker than yours, although in real life they don't look that different. Especially,
oh yes, they do.
Especially the sides of mine are going pretty white, but
I think it looks good. But if you want to think about a friendly wager, maybe our viewers can send in.
I was just going to say, why don't we ask the viewers? We're actually going to ask the viewers of a lot of fun things this week, and hopefully our topic today will turn their hair white. Right?
Oh,
because
God, you don't really want that. I mean, it is if you want to look, like a shrink. It doesn't hurt, but many people won't want it to be this white.
Well, we're talking about hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations today, as promised, and another non-ordinary mind state of consciousness that could be quite terrifying. And there have been cases of people being so frightened that their hair turned white overnight. So
yeah, but let's not just live in the fear state like we're used to in our culture.
Oh yeah, that's
There's also a lot of creativity that happens in these states too. And by the way, they're completely normal people, so it's not like there's some kind of pathology here.
It seems to be an artifact of the brain itself. So as long as the brain has been around, this phenomenon has occurred. I'm surprised how little it's talked about. And I'm really intrigued to get feedback from the viewers on who knows about this, who's had an experience or known someone who's had an experience. But first, why don't we tell them what it is? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Because I think it's kind of fascinating that, this even occurs. But when you understand a little bit about neurophysiology, really the way the brain talks to itself, I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's really fascinating because, the terms come from Greek roots, but basically the hypnagogic phase or the hypnagogic or hypnagogia, as it was really called by itself, is when you're just falling asleep and you're in that twilight state between falling asleep and actually going to bed, or maybe even entering a dream, although it's sometimes difficult to immediately enter a dream on the first sleep onset for some reasons we can talk about. And then, of course, waking up. The other side is the hypnopompic, which was coined by another guy whose name I cannot recall right now, but didn't seem terribly important. I probably would have remembered. But he was a dead white guy, as they often are. But the interesting thing is this phenomenon occurs across all cultures, all time periods. It's been called literally anything and everything from presomnal or anthypnic sensations, visions of half sleep, oneirogogic images, phantasmata, the borderland. I like that. Borderland of sleep.
Absolutely.
Praedormitium.
It's different than hypnosis, though.
Definitely different than hypnosis, because hypnosis, although sometimes you can fall asleep during hypnosis,
that's true.
It's thought that you're generally awake. You may be in a highly suggestible state, but you're usually not in a half dream, half wake state. This is more of like a pre-dream condition or sleep onset dreams. Sometimes people call them dreamlets, or the wakefulness-sleep transition. Yeah. It's got all kinds of funny names, but it's really pretty much settled into, luckily, the nomenclature of hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, because it's an inwardly generated artifact of the way the brain is evolved and the way consciousness and attention are put together.
So basically what you're saying is it's when you're going into sleep or when you're coming out of it. And
yeah, it's like a 10-minute window, basically.
I get that a lot. Actually, now that you mention it, I'm a napper, and I do have these little dreamlets when I have to take a 20-minute nap. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I've certainly experienced it. I got a couple stories for you, but it is what we would call a non-ordinary state or even an altered state. Typically, when the moment you fall asleep, which is interesting because you can see this if you have an EEG on, you have a sleep doctor, they can literally tell you the second that you fell asleep, because there is a switch that occurs in the brain we're going to talk about. But it should be night, day, on, off, black, white. It should be a concrete event. Thank God it's not, or we wouldn't have this. And so sometimes sleep dreams into wakefulness, or wake can push into dreaminess. And, typically you get what you would expect to get. You can get dream imagery. You can usually get really strong visual hallucinations, which almost never occur, even in the most severe forms of mental illness. They're fairly uncommon. More common in delirious states, which I think ties into what we understand about the reasons that this happens. But other parts, it affects the back of the brain. We'll talk about why. But other parts of the brain, like your sense of movement, you can get a sense that you're floating or even falling or sinking into the bed as this is occurring, as this transition is occurring. And it's thought by me that the moment, the actual demarcation point, that line between what is technically awake and what is technically asleep, is met with a loud snap, bang, pop, or a whooshing sound. And I'm curious, I've actually experienced that. A lot of people have, patients have mentioned it to me, and it's loud. It sounds like a transformer or something exploded outside your window, and it will jolt you back awake or push you back onto that side of the fence. I will tell you, in the epidemiologic research, and I agree strongly with this, it's much more common to happen the younger we are. So kids, it's a lot more, as the brain's developing up until the age about 25, it's a lot more common. In adults, actually it's more common in women too. In adults, if you want to do this, you might have more luck if you have epilepsy, which we'll talk about why, or Parkinson's.
When you say do this, you mean have that banging phenomenon, or literally have
any of it?
In terms of the visions that you see, the impressions that you have?
Any and all of it. It's all hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucinations are increased in epilepsy, narcolepsy, and we'll talk about why again, and Parkinson's disease, as well as some other pharmacological influence, we'll just say. So it's all stuff. I mean, how's that for teeing up a lot of info? This is good stuff.
I got my helmet and shoulder pads in the back.
But you're right. To your point before, it's not something to be fearful of. I think it's natural that people are afraid of what they don't understand. And I think there's always been great minds that have recognized this as a very powerful, intuitive, focused time of consciousness where they can generate a lot of solutions or ideas, work on problems. Some famous people.
One of the reasons that we're doing this is to expand awareness of who we are as human beings, so that you don't have to be afraid, because this is going to happen. And if you know about it, then maybe you won't be so scared of it.
Yeah. And maybe be excited to think about your own life and your own situation, your own problems, and less about whether or not the murder hornets are coming, or who's in the election, or 24/7 bombardment with what's on the news in general. I'm going to attempt to do something to show a little. How about this visual? I like this. Let's see. This is my first attempt, I guess, at fulfilling Austin's shoes here today, who's off gluing the practice together. I like this. I like old pictures. I like the way that they thought, and I like that this guy is right there in the twilight, and see all these little, we talked about sprites and stuff, and banshees and all these little mythical creatures, and you got this woman over here with that crazy flower looking thing, and he's thinking about painting her. So there's a dreamlike quality to it, but there's also some really clear visual, even like nightmarish type of implications here, that there's a presence, or that there's a sense that something's physically close or in the room or in the shadows. See these goblins down here with the crazy little death tornado. I like this picture. There was a lot going on in there. We'll come back to that.
Have you ever seen something like that?
That picture? Yeah.
I mean, one of these images in your experience. I've never actually seen the visual stuff. I've had sleep paralysis where I was like half awake, half asleep and couldn't move, and was aware that I couldn't move. And I think that's part of this phenomenon.
Yeah, so sleep paralysis is part of it. I think, well, we'll get to that in a second, because I want to tell you about some famous people.
Ooh, I like famous people.
I wanted you to guess who this was, but I put the picture out of order. So what do you think about this little fella here? Now, he looks decapitated. He's not. He's taken a nap. Thomas Edison was known for power naps. He felt it not only burst his productivity, but he liked maximizing his chance of getting into both a hypnagogic and a hypnopompic state. So he would take little power naps, which, if you think about it, increases your chances of blowing in and out of sleep. And he was actually known for a lot of his inventions and creativity, he claimed, came out of this state. I've got another picture to specifically illustrate how he did it, which I thought was really interesting. And it's probably like Isaac Newton, who interestingly is another person who specifically targeted this phase of consciousness for insight and ingenuity. And, maybe that's where calculus came from. Who knows? I mean, there's the allegory of the apple on the head. Thomas Edison's allegory was he slept with a pair of steel balls in his hand, usually in a chair with his arm outstretched. And if he fell asleep, his hand would relax and they would fall into a metal bucket or a wooden crate below, which would startle him and of course, wake him back up. Now, that last picture that we looked at, it turns out I've got a better zoom in, and tell me what you see here. The down below is the wooden crate. Now, to me, looks like his other hand, one of his hands is covering up his face. His other hand kind of looks like he's doing a little pocket pool there. But I liked this picture because the wooden crate looks like it's just below that uncomfortable sleeping surface. Notice how uncomfortable he's purposely making it, and would target this as a method of insight and creativity. And he was all about efficiency and time. So if he actually fell asleep, he'd jog himself back awake, so he wouldn't miss anything. He could spend more time being creative. And Newton, as I mentioned, did this. Tesla, ironically, as Edison, was both experimenting with the same thing. A lot of famous musicians, composers, even Beethoven and Wagner were known to have targeted this to some degree. Salvador Dali might explain a lot of his trippiness. He would disrupt his dreams a lot of times and try to use the imagery and get it on canvas as quickly as possible. But it was really about hypnagogic cognition, trying to think in that state, almost as similar to a lucid dream, which we've talked about a little bit, but certainly heightened suggestibility. So I didn't want to scare people, you're right, but I wanted to let people know, hey, this is something that not only you should know about, but some of our greatest minds and thinkers have actually targeted this and been curious about it and explored it. And it's really quite fascinating because unlike the lucid dream, which is also hyper real and vivid, there's definitely a hallucination component of it. So you're kind of half in your room while you're half in a dream. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. What's different is when you're half in your room, you may be seeing a person in your room as clear as you're seeing me, an image, which can be somewhat distressing if you're not prepared for that. Unfortunately, narcoleptics have a little bit more experience with this because it's more common because they have a disease of the reticular activating system, which I'll talk about more in a second. But you said you had a story about this, or was that more sleep paralysis?
Oh, well, I don't get that many visual images, but I have gotten music during those times. And because, I like to write music, I would have to rush over and record it right away, because if I didn't, I'd lose it.
So you get music inspiration though?
Oh yeah. Well, I literally hear music in my head, and I go, hey, that's pretty good. I don't think it's anybody else's. Maybe it's mine. And I would record it and then try to go back to sleep and then deal with it later. But at least I had the tune. And I've had lots of, because I nap regularly, lots of dreamlets. And for me, they feel more like intuitive impressions rather than pictures, because I'm not that visual in my inner world. But almost every time I nap, I have something like that happen. And I nap just about every day.
But you don't always hear the same music. What you get
Oh,
is
no.
Well,
when I was a young person, I would hear the Beatles, or I'd hear the Who, or Genesis was a big one. I don't know why. I would hear The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway a lot. Now it's creative. It's my own. And I think because I've been writing music for so long now, my brain seeks out those vibrations, or my soul, or whatever. I don't know what to call it. The me, wants that. And I guess I'm not Edison or any of those guys, but it's the same idea, is I want this to happen. And, right. part of life is, the shortest distance between 2 points sometimes is your intention. So my intention is to experience music in a different way, experience these vibrations, and then bring them out. So yes, I've had that experience a lot with music. But yeah, I know.
Oh, look, it matches our slide deck. Well, a lot of people have a identical music experience, which I did not find that much in my research, but I have heard that, and I have read that in some books. I couldn't find it on the internets because the internet is garbage. I just want to get that. It's you
remember what Abe Lincoln said? Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the exact state though. It's more, I think the music state that I have is more like a daydream state. It doesn't feel, I've had it on my way into naps, usually more on my way in than on my way out for some reason.
Some people it's more vivid on the way out, some people on the way in, some people both. But I find it fascinating that the shared music that people report sounds like an ice cream truck. Just sort of this.
Yeah. I've had that experience now that you mention it.
Which is bizarre to me. That I don't have an explanation or an understanding of, but
it sounded to me like a Rickenbacker 12-string guitar. And maybe that's why I've always been enamored with those guitars. It was a sound that came out of the 60s. The Beatles had it, the Byrds, the Who, a number of major groups would play this guitar, and the sound is unique. There's nothing else like it in music. And it is a jangly, it's that ice cream truck jangly.
It's very quiet. It seems very distant, but people almost always describe it as an ice cream truck.
I hear you.
Jangle, yeah. which I find fascinating. I got a story for you, Rich. You might get a kick out of this one.
Okay.
Speaking of sleep paralysis here, Now, I have a good buddy in high school, Steve. I hope he watches this. Steve, you know who you are. He was over at our house, which many thought were haunted at the time, but it was just a good set of ghost stories that we told each other. One thing that a lot of people have experienced is a sensation of waking up and not being able to move. Now, you've just come out of the sleep state, and so it's not terribly uncommon to visually hallucinate either or your brain interprets as a presence that there is some creature or being on top of you physically holding you down and you can't move. Now, the interesting thing is you can also not scream. Some people try to violently twist or roll out of bed, and essentially to no avail. And that's really what a lot of the lore and the myth that we talked about with whether it's the banshees or the wraiths, a lot of them may have been simply sleep paralysis, that the part, the motor strip that controls all of our voluntary movements hasn't woken up yet, whereas other parts of our brain has, like our visual cortex, because it's thought that, the way the brain evolved from the brainstem and cerebellum on back and then all the way forward to what we consider the most human, our frontal cortex, and does a lot of work while we're awake, and executive functioning and planning, and I got to be here, got to be there, and all that, motivation, all of that good stuff. It has to do with the way the brain either dies or shuts down, kind of like the way a computer shuts down in a sequence, because the thinking of the neurobiology piece and mostly the dynamics of the falling asleep process is we go from really the alpha state, alpha waves, pass through theta, and then ultimately we're trying to get to delta. And there's some other stuff in between that's not really as important, but the point is that the brain doesn't all do this simultaneously. Certain parts of the brain does it. It occurs in different rates. It's usually faster in the front, which means our frontal lobe, the stuff that, what am I going to do tomorrow? Worried about this, worried about that, is the first to shut off. Now, some of the most ancient parts of the brain, as we go back, our brainstem doesn't totally fall asleep, or we forget to breathe while we're asleep. But what's in the back? Vision. Our cerebellum is balance. So that's why it's thought that there's visual phenomenon that can occur easily. And also that sense of falling I was talking about before, because the cerebellum's late to go offline.
What about
makes a lot of sense.
Like body jerks, body quick movements? I actually, now that you mention it, I have those a lot. And I always thought it was just that I was starting to relax a little bit, but maybe it's something else.
So it's when the sleep paralysis comes on, or when the body's essentially unplugged. Some people call it a hypnic jerk, or a sleep start even. May have heard of that. I think of it as like a muscle hiccup, is as the muscles are unplugged at the last second, because muscles aren't sitting there relaxed until our brain comes and sends a signal. Our brain's always sending a signal for tone to keep the muscle in the shape and hold our bones together in the shape of what we look like as human. Then when I want to move, that electrical signal increases its frequency so that the muscle contracts further. So if we get to a point where that electrical signal goes below, there can be a last minute, like when you unplug a cord and there's that spark at the wall. That's the way I think of it. It's kind of twitches could be glitches of the motor strips shutting off. It may also explain some of the auditory phenomenon that goes off as well. But
I've actually now that we're dialoguing, repeatedly the experience where I'm either having a catch with someone in my mind. More often I'm playing baseball and I'm waiting for the pitch, and the guy throws the pitch, and I see the pitch coming and I have to swing, and then as I swing, I will wake up as I have that movement. Or if I'm catching the ball, I would wake up. Now that you mention it, yeah, I've had that a lot.
Yeah, and some scientists think it's tiny bursts of electrical activity, kind of like that spark, or almost like seizure, like if you could see it or measure it on an EEG. And it is considered a sleep disorder. Some people do call it a parasomnia, which, you know, could be anything from sleepwalking, which is very different, you know, different types of sleep or parasomnias and sleep disorders. But I alluded to it before, chemical intervention. It turns out the electrical theory makes a lot of sense to me, not only in the way the brain shuts down and some of the phenomenon that we get along with it, like the sounds and the jerking, but what we know is narcolepsy it's associated with. I won't go too much into depth on Parkinson's and epilepsy, but epilepsy is an aberration of electrical activity. So that's not too far of a stretch. Parkinson's has to do more with a loss of dopaminergic in the, like, you know, a part of in the motor strip, a deep part of the motor strip that controls movement. Now, narcolepsy is a disease sometimes of the reticular activating system, which is the very system that's thought to be involved here. And they discovered that from, you know, the fainting goats, the narcoleptic goats. There's a hormone in animals called hypocretin. We call it orexin in humans because we got to be different. It's the same thing. That's literally the hormone, kind of like melatonin would be to that system, which is different because the reticular activating system uses this hormone and it's a signal and it's flip the switch. This is an on-off state. So that it's thought that the narcoleptics that have a defect in the gene encoding for orexin, that's what's causing their narcolepsy. That's why they're more likely to have these types of parasomnias in general, but certainly hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. And that's why alcohol, benzos, barbiturates, benzoligands, drugs like Ambien and Lunesta and all them, Sonata, they promote not only parasomnias, but they certainly promote these types of hallucinations, which all fits together quite well.
That sounds like it would explain some of the phenomena you find with Ambien, where people are sleep driving and sleep eating and, you know, all kinds of stuff.
The way I explain it to patients is there are parts of your brain that are wide awake and there are parts that are completely asleep. Now that's occurring for a lot longer than 10 minutes. That's occurring for the whole length of the drug itself, particularly the hippocampus. It's really good at shutting down. That's why people have complete and total utter amnesia. Also their frontal lobes, so their judgment. You know, Oscar Pistorius used this as a defense on why he shot his girlfriend. It's terrifying because this is not a state of being you want to be in and interacting with society, your family, community, if half your brain is asleep. You're the closest thing to a true zombie at that point.
Wow.
Is the way I try to warn patients about it. And then that the sounds can be very unsettling. I've even heard that loud bang or the gunshot described as the exploding head syndrome. So I can't underestimate the volume of that noise contrasted with the tiny volume of the ice cream truck, which is kind of interesting. And the fun thing about YouTube, there's something for everybody. You can go on there and you can actually look at videos on how to target this. Because there's, just like lucid dreaming or the Monroe Institute or LaBerge, there are techniques to help you facilitate that. Not just like Thomas Edison with the balls, but how to, you know, if you're trying to enter through falling asleep, techniques such as focusing on the back of your eyelids and not moving for as long as possible. So it helps promote that motor strip to start cascading different systems to go offline, to go to sleep, but you're intensely focused on a pinpoint, because it's thought that eye movement helps keep you awake. And certainly light coming through your eyelids and the pineal gland can interfere the brain's sleep-wake moments and processes. Oh, I got some other slides here.
What else you got?
Let's see here. Oh, this is another scary one. Well, not really scary, but I think of it as a fun one. Let's see if this comes up. So this is another painting, little bit blurrier one, but It reminds me of that cat in that one Stephen King movie that comes up and sucks your soul out of your nostrils, you know, inhales and pulls all the wispy smoke out. So this person's sleep paralysis, is this legal? Am I allowed to show blurry boobs on TV? I hope so.
Not TV, Mark.
You know, you can.
It's all good.
This other creature's coming down from the ether, it looks like, and to me, it looks like they're extracting something. Maybe there's some stabbing going on there. Definitely not fun for the whole family. So I would say they can be quite distressing. But I think if you're aware that it exists, you understand it, you can accept this as a natural artifact of sleep, which in and of itself is kind of confounding and bizarre that we spend so much time in it.
I spend not the most of my practice, but I do some dream interpretation. It seems to me like this is not interpretable, that this is more like an archetype, you know, an archetypal situation where certain images show up, maybe not based on a person's biology or biography. You know, it just comes out of somewhere in the deep recesses of the brain that, you know, because if the images are similar for across cultures and across ages, then it isn't because, you know, I didn't get the same number of French fries as my brothers when I was a young person.
Well, you bring up a fascinating point, because dream interpretation, which we should do a show on, by the way, you know, you've got interpretation of normal dreams, we'll just say dreams that we'll call classical. And then should you interpret lucid dreams the same way you interpret non-lucid dreams or ordinary?
I don't.
Or take it a step further, do you take these dreams or the dreamscape of hypnagogy or hypnopompic differently than the lucid dreams and the non-lucids?
I would, yeah. I think, you know, and because I think it's a different process.
I mean, that's a big question mark there. It'd be fascinating to explore it, because I think certainly you can have nightmares, you can have hellish lucid experience. Some near-death experiences can even be hellish. We don't like to talk about it, and they're very rare, but they exist. Certainly some lucid dreams can be hellish, rare, because you have a lot more direction over and control over your dream with some limits. But the hypnagogic hallucinations tend to be more ego-dystonic, I've found. They're more disjointed, they're more disorienting, they're a lot more like a lucid, they're hyper real, but they're a lot more engaging. Like if I see somebody standing at the foot of my bed and I know I'm in my room and I'm half asleep and half awake, that's going to startle me more than, oh my gosh, I'm in a dream of being in my room. Although lucid dreaming, you don't usually start in your room. So they tend to be more distressing. And then certainly with the sleep paralysis piece, if you can't move or blink or scream, that's a problem. You're gonna imagine a presence.
In most dreams, what I tell patients is, if you want to know if you're in a dream, look at something, look away, and look back, and it will change.
Look at a number or a symbol or a letter.
Yeah, even a person. But I have had the experience, and now that you mention it, it was in one of these states. It was not that long after my mother passed. I saw her, and I looked away because I know to look away, and look back, and she was still there. Look back, and it did inspire a song. It inspired the awareness, you know, because it really seemed like she was there. I mean, that was pretty impressive. So, you know, I felt like I was looking. I had a little periscope into a different reality, you know, or a different vibrational state. That's what it felt like anyway.
Yeah, I've had very similar experiences. When I did my lucid dreaming, I always relied only on numbers and letters, because I found that I could trust them 100%. And I could believe them more in my dream state. If I looked at someone, looked away and looked back, and they were different, I had a harder time saying that's not normal. My dream presence or my dream mind struggled with that a little bit more. And maybe it's because I'm more mathematically wired. I don't know. But if I looked at the clock and it said 12:52, I looked away, looked right back, and it said 2:52 or 2:50, whatever, anything, any variation, I knew 100% that I was lucid dreaming, and I was off to do my work. I think we only have time for one question today. Austin has a good one. She thinks this is the best, so I'm going to throw it out there. And this is from Lance in I don't know where. How does this differ, I guess assuming what we're talking about, from sleep terrors, or I guess night terrors, which is an excellent question. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm going to guess that night terrors they don't come on your way in or out of sleep. And night terrors don't usually have an image associated with them. It's a bolt out of the blue, and all of a sudden it's almost like you're living a panic attack that came out of nowhere. Whereas the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states are specific in that you're going in and out of sleep. That's how I would handle it. Would you add anything?
Yeah, and I'd add having kids of my own who had different flavors of night terrors. 90+%, I was 100% certain it was because they needed to pee. And whatever part of their brain that woke their body up to try to go find the toilet, sometimes successful, sometimes not, left the remainder of their brain asleep. Certainly their memory, they never remember a night terror, whereas you most certainly would remember this. And like you said, it occurs within 10 minutes of falling asleep. Night terrors can happen any and all times. If any parents are watching out there and they got kids with night terrors, one of two things is how you deal with it. One, put them on the potty. They still have enough motor coordination, interestingly, to not only pee or wipe themselves and find their way back up to their bed. Even if they have to crawl upstairs to a bunk bed, they can do that just fine. They will remember nothing. And two, if that fails, take them outside if you can lay hands on them. Sometimes they will scream bloody murder and you would have to tackle them like a rabid fox. But if you get them outdoors, something about the ceiling not being there calms them down and they go right back into sleep. You can throw them into bed. So that was a little bonus tip for you parents out there. So that's the big difference.
Your mental wealth tip of the day.
That was it. That was it. We were looking for it.
About what to do.
So I'm eager to know. I hope some people leave some comments if they know anyone that has had this experience, or better yet, if they've had it themselves. It's a super cool topic, a lot of fun to talk about. I think next week's going to be awesome too. I mean, we're biased, right? We think all of our topics are awesome. So
because we love exploring this stuff, and I think once again, the purpose of the show is to connect with people who want to explore non-ordinary mind. And it's I was thinking about this. This is all normal. The things that we're bringing up are all normal parts of human consciousness. So it's an exploration of human consciousness, but it's only non-ordinary because we define ordinary a certain way. It's actually part of our consciousness, and I find that endlessly fascinating.
I do too. And next week, I'm going to find deathbed visions and terminal lucidity to be super fascinating. Something I've done a lot of research on, had a lot of interest in myself. So I'll have a lot to say for next time.
That should be fun.
So I guess we're wrapped up for today, and join us next time. And in the meantime,
until then, 1, 2, 3, 4, be well.
4? Why are you always doing the 4?
Because I'm a musician. Everything's 4/4, man.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again.
1, 2, 3, be well.
You just changed it.
You told me to do it. You told me to try one more time.
I quit. I'm out of here. All right, one more time.
What are we doing, 3 or 4?
Be well.
Well.
I just did it.
Close.
I don't even give a damn.
Hey, everybody. We'll see you next week.